Expand, so I guess.
Hey everyone, it's Rita Denoyer Garcia of Becoming Awake and the Calm Mom Alliance. And today we're going to be talking to my friend Tammy, who is fantastic. I'm very excited about this. Um, and I'm going to read her intro to you. I know a lot of things about her, but I want to read it because it's such a great intro. So this is it. Tammy has a vision that every highly sensing woman stops hiding, feeling wrong, playing small, and stops trying to be less sensitive, and comes to recognize and honor her unique gifts and talents, and to embrace her sensitive nature so that she can be a gentle yet strong force in the world. I love this mission and vision statement. As a highly sensing person, which is a HSP, Tammy understands what it's like to navigate the non-highly sensitive world. Amen. I feel like it's getting more and more like that. She uses a body or a mind, body, spirit focus and uses the art and connection with nature, as well as mindful practices, meditation, energy work, and EFT tapping to help other highly sensing people to minimize overwhelm and develop self-compassion and self-love. Totally checks all my boxes here. And embrace their trait and move from surviving to thriving. And finally, she is the best-selling contributing author of an app called Highly Sensitivity or High Sensitivity or Highly Sensitive. I'm not sure. Okay. And a weekly, what is it? Highly
Sensitive Souls is my app, actually.
Oh, highly. Okay.
And then I'm a contributing author in a couple of different books that are
Okay.
other
All
than
right, we're
that.
going to get to all that. Yeah, and a weekly TV series for highly sensitive people. She works with clients in her home studio outside of Sun River and online. And then we're going to put all of her contact information below. And we'll talk a little about quick ways to connect with her after the interview. But welcome, Tammy.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you again.
I know. We just did another interview a couple weeks ago where you interviewed me. So now I get to interview you.
And it's
So
always
here's
awesome when we have conversations. So I'm
I know,
excited.
I love it. I know. So, my first question to you is, can you just for a brief moment, just tell your story, or take as long as you need, really, about how you how did you get into this? How did you start doing this?
So I'll try to make it not too long. So I have a master's in counseling, and for years I worked as a licensed counselor, and my primary clientele was survivors of physical, sexual, and domestic abuse, violence, all of that. It was
Wow.
pretty intense, not
Yeah.
surprisingly.
Yeah.
And I was not aware of sensitivity at the time. And so I was always actually really good at self-care, but after a little while, that wasn't quite enough because I didn't orchestrate everything just right or have the right mindset. And one day I hit a wall and did not want to work anymore, which, I mean, that's not very good if you're going to go and work with clients. So I had to make some changes, but ultimately I just said, I can't do this anymore. So I did some other things, massage and energy work. That's when I started doing that. But then I was really, had that calling to be working in that emotional realm again. So that's when I stepped into coaching. And then along this line, I discovered high sensitivity. And it was because I had an issue come up with a friend who was also my business partner at the time doing massage. And just, we were constantly butting heads on things. And I was just feeling so misunderstood and not supported and disrespected, even though I really liked her and we were friends, but I was like, what's going on? So we had this really big blow up, and another friend that was supporting me said, hey, you should check this out. And it was like the 16 traits of highly sensitive people. So I pulled this up online, and oh my gosh, this is, it's like ding, 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 like all through, it's like, 14 of these 16 things, that's me. So immediately it was a matter of like, oh, it's not just me. It's on the internet. Somebody created an
Yeah.
inventory. It's not just me. And as I read through each of those things, all of these other, bells went off. It's like, oh, that's why this. And it just validated my experience and gave a reason for it. I wasn't just making stuff up or being difficult or whatever, just trying to always figure out, why am I so unique? I mean, so different, and why don't people understand me? And now I had a reason. And so of course I took a deep dive into what that was all about. And so in the meantime, I'm working with clients as a coach and learning more about myself and finding that a lot of people that are finding me are also highly sensing. And after a while, I said, oh, okay, well, that's really interesting. Even if people don't realize it, we start talking and say, oh, what have you heard about this? And then they say, oh my gosh, that's me. What is that? And so there was that piece. But then I also, as I started, introducing it more, and I heard from clients that they'd had counseling or coaching in the past, but only felt like they could get so far because they weren't truly understood or heard even sometimes. And so then that's when I realized, okay, that's my niche. I mean, that's
Yeah.
something that's a void that's not being filled. And that became my main focus in working with clients, because I get it. So, I come from that place, and then I've gone through various, places on my journey of counseling and coaching and all of that, but from a perspective of high sensitivity. So that's how it just became like, oh, this is kind of a no-brainer. This makes sense. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
I love your story, and it's not uncommon for coaches that they coach in the area where they were very challenged. And one of the things I love about your story was not that you had a difficulty, but that, and I think this happens with moms all the time. They hit a wall, they hit an obstacle, they don't want to do something, there's something wrong, and they think there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with this, or I shouldn't be doing. I mean, I've said the same thing to myself.
Sure.
But really what it is, it's an opportunity to dig deeper and to see something maybe you haven't seen before that can open up a whole world that you didn't
Right.
know existed. So I love that about your story. So if moms, if you're out there and you're feeling that there's something wrong, I don't want to do this doesn't feel right, there's something in there. There's a big golden nugget for you that's exciting to be found. I know it sucks when you're in it, but when you find it, you're like, oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I love that part of your story.
And one of the keys that as well is that idea that reminding yourself, when you're in it, it's hard, but reminding yourself this is temporary
yes,
and there's a message. So if I
yes,
just take a deep breath, 20 deep breaths, a half hour of deep breaths, and just sit back and say, okay, what might the message be?
yes.
And I'll get over it. I don't know how. I'll start putting the word out or the energy out for getting help in some way. Something will come up and go, oh, that could help me. But we can't do that if we're locked into this
Oh,
is wrong, I'm wrong, something's not, this is never going to work. And
yep,
it,
yep.
and
And
it
we've all been there. We've all been there. And, one of my many, many teachers, Robert Scheinfeld, and when I see teacher, I mean someone I took their course and I read their book type thing. Robert Scheinfeld says, under every fear is an Easter egg.
oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a little surprise that you didn't know, but you got to go into it in order to find it. So we
Yeah,
tend to go, fear, we go, and
right.
we're just delaying the discovery on the other side. So,
And it's that idea of, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that
yeah,
if we're growing, we have to be in periods of discomfort. We can't just stay status quo
yes,
and go, okay, but I'm going to focus on all these things and I'm going to grow. It's like, well, you have to do the work in terms of saying,
yeah.
okay, I'm going to acknowledge what I don't know. I'm going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay.
Yeah, things are just moving. They're just
Yeah.
moving parts. And it's uncomfortably on those because you're like, whoa, I'm not on solid ground anymore. But it's like, it's all right. It'll settle. Don't worry. It's just going to reconfigure itself. So, great reminders for all of us. So, so what kind of, I mean, highly sensing people, but like, can give us an example? Like, who seeks you out? What have you seen, like in terms of results, like from here to there? Tell us a story or two
Mhm.
about some people that you've worked with, so we can get a better idea of what
So
you.
one that's popping up is a client I had a few years ago who worked in, well, in a specific, I mean, she I don't think this is going to give anything away, but she helped manage a funeral home, but it was
Okay.
not just, it's like a broader umbrella of that, because sometimes she
Okay.
would go
Okay.
and, help out at other ones as well.
Right.
But she had like a home base, basically, a primary one. And she was very, pretty ideal client. Like, she was open to, spiritual discussions and being more aware of herself. and stepping out of the box. I mean, we tend to do that as highly sensing people anyway. We look at the bigger picture and step out of the box, but sometimes that can be uncomfortable still. But she was struggling with relationships within her family, especially her daughters and siblings, and then relationships within, like dealing with her boss that did things in ways that she didn't think, were quite okay, didn't sit with her. But she really had a hard time, standing up for herself, voicing her opinions, putting her goodness, her good work out there, because she was afraid that someone would think badly of her, that they would think that she didn't know what she was talking about, or she overstepped her bounds, or maybe she'd sit back and go, well, maybe I'm seeing it wrong, maybe that's just the way it's supposed to be, and I'm making way too much of it because I do that. She was aware of that. It's like, I make everything really big and everything's super important and I can't let it go, because that's really common for highly sensing folks, because we do see the big picture and we're like a sponge, pulling everything in without all those filters. So she also was frustrated with, which is very common, like not being able to set things aside. So she'd go to work and okay, I'm going to focus on this one thing. But up here, she's worried about, her boss doing things that she didn't think is okay. And then she's trying to help someone else over here, but there's some kind of like underlying, she was very sensitive to emotional, energy shifts. So there would be people that she'd have these not even like above board issues with, but she'd like, work with them and say, there's something there. There's something, they don't like me, or there's, she would feel this like energetic friction, even though no one has said anything. So those became really big. And then the same thing with her family, she'd say a certain thing and it'd be taken wrong. And so then she wouldn't want to speak up. And then, just all of these. And then of course she was also searching for a romantic relationship. And she was sort of involved with someone who she just knew that wasn't quite the right fit, but she didn't want to let go because she didn't want to hurt feelings. And so there was just a lot of not wanting other people to be upset with her, not wanting to rock the boat, feeling like she was not being heard or understood. And, working on, she spent a lot of time doing self-focused work. And sometimes she had meditated, sometimes she'd done, but then she realized also she really had no stable, consistent self-care practice. And she said, oh yeah, I know that's helpful. I've tried that, but not, not because she was spending all of her time taking care of somebody else. Like a lot of moms, right? So she was just saying, yeah, I know that's good for me, but I feel like I have to take care of all this other stuff first, and then I'll take care of me, which, as we pretty much all know up here, that doesn't work. We will just completely get depleted. So she was depleted a lot. Highly sensing people really get energetically, emotionally depleted much quicker, because again, like we're, the sponge pulling all that stuff in, and then we get overfull on the input, and then our own energy is like drained, and we get to the point where I can't do anything. So she stopped doing all the things that she really loved to do, whether that was, riding her bike every single morning, which gave her exercise, but also time in nature, which she really thrived on, but she wasn't doing that anymore. And she wasn't getting herself out into nature because she felt guilty taking that time off to go walk, in nature for 15 minutes. So all of those things she wasn't doing. And then socially, she had kind of withdrawn and wasn't doing all of that stuff because she was just on edge. And, she just didn't feel like by the end of the day, she'd have these great plans, but then not be able to attend or just say, I'm out of energy. I just can't do it. So, multiple things in her life. So, she was actually able eventually to fine tune what was okay for her and not okay in her work. And she actually, set a limit and said, I'd love to keep working for you, but these things are going to have to be in place, in order for that to work. And she actually did make a shift and went to a different company. And but chose, up front to saying, these are the things that are necessary for me to thrive, in my work. And so she was able to get that. And then her, relationships with her kids and her family overall really improved. And actually, which just happens quite often too, when highly sensing people acknowledge it, honor it, and then share it with other people, they find out other people in their family are also highly sensing, or that they have recognized, oh, well, that's why this, and this happened. That makes so much sense. And then they're like, oh, all I had to do was say it. And suddenly now people understand me so much more without me even explaining, just saying, oh, because of this high sensitivity thing here, check this out. And they go, oh, well, that makes so much, so much sense. And so, she just felt really supported in her life again. And then she was able to, she started riding her bike every single day. And she was the kind, and she continued to do this, even if it was, 30 degrees outside or even colder, she'd be out there on her bike because it just really fed her. So she was able to go back to that and start doing more social engagement, activities, all of those things that she'd been missing, that she'd experienced before, and she knew they were good for her. And then she was also able to really establish that consistent self-care practice, which of course helped everything else. Because once we can really get a handle on our nervous system, really get that calm down consistently, and have all of those pieces in place to take care of ourselves, then we're able to, put more in our bucket because our own energy is higher. But also part of that is, and that's one of the things that she worked a lot on, is boundaries. Because we tend to, like a lot of people, not establish our boundaries. And if we're busy moms, it's like, oh yeah, I really don't like that, and letting that go because we're too busy or whatever. But she worked really well, really hard on that, and was able to really step back and say, oh, okay, I can set this boundary and it doesn't make me a bad person. And look at actually what happens when you stick with it. It's hard to stick with it sometimes, because when we do that, when we set a boundary and people are used to us working in a certain way, there's some backlash, right? They're like, wait a second, my like easy boat here is rocked now, and this isn't working anymore. I'm not able to push you over or whatever. And so that can be, again, that being comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to acknowledge that, okay, I'm going to start setting these boundaries. Sometimes people might not like it, but I'm going to stick with it. And then it works. And then, sometimes we just have to say, okay, well, maybe I don't do that with that person, or I don't ask that person for this because I'm not going to get that, that positive result that I'm looking for, but I'm still going to maintain those boundaries.
Yes.
And I would say that's one of the primary things, with across the board with everyone that I work with is the boundary issue. And once people are able to do that, wow, it's amazing, because it's scary at first, right? You're like, well, if I set these boundaries, I'm going to push all these people away. Like, well, sometimes there are people in our lives that it's okay if we say, oh, well, if they got pushed away, then they didn't take, the time to try to work through that with me. But usually it creates, a lot of positive results, because when we set boundaries, we're honoring ourselves. And when we honor ourselves, then other people can honor us.
Absolutely. I think I have a million questions now from the story. One of them is, maybe this is not a question. Boundaries was a big thing for me. I think I don't know if I'm a super highly sensing person, but I know I haven't looked at the list, but I'm
there's
sure
there's a spectrum of that for sure.
Yeah. And boundaries was a big one for me. And I noticed that one of my resistance points to making boundaries was because I wasn't sure I could maintain the boundary.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning, I'm going to set this boundary, say with my kid, I'm going to set this boundary, and then will I break the boundary because I feel uncomfortable, or because I feel like they're suffering, or maybe I'm doing it wrong, or maybe I'm being too harsh, and then it's going to be embarrassing, and I'm going to look like a hypocrite, and like already
feel guilty.
Yes. Or you're not supposed to have boundaries. And I've learned over the years that first, you're going to be uncomfortable. That's normal. You can always tweak the boundary over time. And I may not be able to maintain it, and then I can go back. It's sort of like being on a new diet or whatever. Like sometimes you're going to break your diet. That doesn't mean you just stop.
Right.
Or whatever diet or meal plan or whatever you want to call it. I mean, just you get back on
any behavior.
Any habit
that you're working to change. Even if it's like, okay, I'm going to meditate every day. So you miss a day. And instead of saying, oh, well, I missed that, so I can't do this. I'm not going to do it.
Right.
Instead of saying, oh, right, this is a new pattern I'm trying to develop.
Yes.
Okay. So, restart. Tomorrow I get to do it, again, and then build that habit So, that pattern, but yeah, every time, I mean, that's the part of growth too, is like, we can't just succeed with every single thing every time. We're going to have
Yeah.
those, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, whatever, however you want to say that. So, yeah, with boundaries, with anything.
With anything, you're right. It's
Yeah.
pretty universal. The other question I have is, can you tell us a little more specifically? Well, maybe this will be a confessional. What items on this list stuck out to you as like, oh my gosh, that's me? I just want to give people more of a
High sensitivity.
high sensitivity, what they could look at to recognize that in themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because people will ask that, well, what does that mean to be highly sensing? So quite often it's being distracted by external noises, lights, experiences, input. For me, it's definitely noise, but I was just talking with a client yesterday and she said, yeah, I've taken these things and a lot of them are me, but then some of them are not. And we talked about noise and she goes, yeah, noises don't bother me. But for some of us, like, oh, I can't concentrate on anything because there's all this stuff going on. So sometimes it's noise, sometimes it's lights, sometimes it's energy. So we tend to pick up on other people's energy or the energy of a room a lot sooner than others, and not, because this is another piece too, is not being able to, not doing well with letting things go. So we tend to hear things like, oh, it's no big deal, just let it go. And we're saying, well, no, it feels like a really big deal.
Yeah.
So and then not feeling understood or heard or being discounted again by
Oh,
things like, oh,
yeah.
you're too sensitive, or, well, that doesn't make any sense, don't worry about it. Yeah. Hearing those things quite often, or that we need to, grow a thicker skin, or not worry about what somebody else says because it's not pertinent, or that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, no,
And then,
yeah, I totally relate to a lot of that. And I can think of people that I know very well. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Yeah.
yeah, and we tend to be very, very perfectionistic. I mean, not that, and a lot of the things that highly sensing people experience, like, intensely, other people experience too, but just not to a point where it's troublesome or on the radar, right? I mean, it's not like we have only these unique things that no one else ever experiences, but they can be really intense, like more difficulty setting boundaries or maintaining them. But
Yeah.
some of it is that perfectionism and wanting everyone to like us and to, not be upset with us ever. And but also wanting everyone else to be happy and secure and say,
Oh my
feeling good.
gosh.
And so we will own a lot of stuff that's not ours because we're just
Yes.
uncomfortable, sometimes energetically, sometimes emotionally, with someone else being uncomfortable. One of the big nuggets, I think, is for everyone, but especially for highly sensing people, is if someone else is suffering, whatever that looks like, for us to suffer with them does not help. It can actually make things worse because we're just feeding
Yeah.
that energy, that frequency, if you will. But that's a very common thing for us too, is like, oh, somebody else that I love or care about is suffering, so I can't be happy, or what will
Right.
that say about me? I mean, because we tend to have
Right.
very
I must be
strong
some
compassion.
psychopath if I'm happy while this person is not.
Exactly. What kind of
Yeah.
person am I to experience happiness when, yeah, this person is suffering? So that's pretty common too.
Wow. I was
Um,
thinking I had a job many moons ago where it was kind of a dysfunctional place. And one of my friends was coming on to the job. And at my recommendation, I was like, yeah, I mean, there's problems, but it's, you can pay the rent. And so she comes on and she was offered one person, or I had the preference of who my supervisor was going to be. One was going to be her supervisor and one was going to be mine. And I had a preference for one for me, but I decided to give it to her because I knew she would not get along with this person. And I thought I can handle this
yeah.
supervisor. Well, this supervisor was a little, and it was my demise. Like I ended up leaving because of the supervisor. And I thought,
Mhm.
why did I do that?
Yes.
I was protecting her. It was easier for me to take that burden on,
Right.
her to suffer and then go, why did you do, blame me or something like that.
Yeah. And I'm not thinking of an actual, line in most inventories that would speak to that specifically. I think it's a combination of things, but that is very common for us to be the one that people always lean on or go to for advice, even though they're not telling anybody else anything, or, you're standing in line at the store or something and someone's telling you
Yes.
the life story.
Yeah.
But also, like coming up with solutions. People will seek us out, but also in terms of the situation that you just mentioned, sometimes it's okay, well, I need to let someone else do okay, and so
It's easier.
I will
It's
struggle or whatever
easier.
because I can. But
Yes.
then the flip side is what I've discovered, even just most recently when I do this, dance performance thing that's a fundraiser, and they pair us up. And I got paired with someone who was definitely the most, my partner had no rhythm. And there were some other things. And so, but it was like, it happened super fast. And I thought, I know who my partner is. And he was amazing. I'm really amazing. But in terms of dance, I was like, wow. And so talking with the gal later, she said, well, I paired you guys up because I know you were the only one that could handle it. So we run into those things very often
Yes.
where,
You're the
because
savior.
we're
Yeah.
capable, because we see things out of the box, and we tend to be really good in, especially like in a workplace situation with a group, knowing what everybody needs, and keeping
Yep.
things kind of mellow, and all that kind of stuff. So we tend to be given the stuff that's more challenging, or so people are like, oh well, you can handle it. Not that it has anything to do with like fairness, or well, why should everybody else have everything just like super easy? But we're seen as those that can handle it.
Who
And so
can
sometimes
handle
we
it?
do do
Yeah.
those things. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I have one more question about that, and then I want to move on to how this can help stressed out professional moms. But the question I have is, because you talked about getting distracted, and it made me think, do you think people are misdiagnosed with like ADHD and they're really high? Is there a confluence or a Venn diagram or
Yeah, that's a really astute question, because, and actually, when I was a counselor, part of the work that I did, I worked in the school system for a year. So I saw kids, on site. So I was part of their IEPs, their special, program, like meetings, and trying to figure out what they need. And for an entire year, I sat by going, there can't be this many children in this school that have ADHD. But
right?
at the
It's like,
time, I'm like, I don't know what else is going on, but this can't be, this just can't
yeah,
be. But
yeah,
I didn't have an answer. And during that time that I was doing that, all that research was really, coming to force, and starting to be disseminated a little after that. So it's not like I had that to work with to understand that. But so yes, I've sat back often and thought, oh, how many of those kids were actually highly sensing and
yeah,
not ADHD? So there's some crossover. There can be both at the same time. They're not exclusionary. So there can be crossover, especially in terms of things that bother us, bother, kids or adults. And then the distractibility piece can be there in terms of, like, if we have our environment just so, we can be laser focused and churn out amazing, productivity, and have everything going just right. But if there are certain things that other people aren't bothered by, so it can seem like, what's the big deal? Why
yep,
is this a problem? But if our environment is not suited to us, then we can really be distracted, because there's so much going on, and we're paying attention to these noises and those lights and people coming and
yes,
like an open office situation is a nightmare for a highly sensing person.
yeah,
So some of that stuff can also be a problem, or challenging for someone with ADHD. So there can be some overlap, but it's not the same. So
okay,
I do know people who will ignore, and I don't diagnose, and so they'll come and say, oh yeah, I have ADHD and I'm highly sensing, and I just take their word for that and just focus on the piece that I know.
right,
And then sometimes it's people recognizing, like, oh, you know what, I've heard people saying, oh, maybe I have ADHD, but this is what really resonates, and now all these other things make sense. So yeah, there can be
yeah.
some crossover in terms of the level of sensitivity, or, like, again, that distractibility.
Yeah, I'm
But
thinking I'm
Yeah.
thinking anxiety, OCD, things like that can be
Yep.
all, man, this is blowing me
Yes.
away. So, um, how would what you do help stressed out professional moms? Because that's my niche.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I highlight people who work with the same population or can work with the same population. So could you describe that a little bit? Like how do you see what you do helping?
Yeah. Well, so the primary thing that I work with all of my clients on, whether they're highly sensing or not, is establishing that ongoing sustainable self-care practice, starting with the nervous system piece. Because sometimes people are like, well, I exercise, I do this for myself, I read once in a while, I do these things, but I'm still just like this all the time. And so some of that stuff has to be specific to calming that nervous system. And a lot of that is like being present in the moment, but also emotional regulation and energetic, focus, recognizing what we're affected by energetically. So identifying all of that and working toward that is always the first step. And then being able to build upon that and just have more and more tools for that. But that's really the first thing, because anyone who's feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, needs more time, even if they already have they'd say, well, I take care of myself pretty well. But looking at what that is and really fine tuning it and seeing what actually takes their amped system down several notches so that they can manage things more. So that's the real beginning there. And then I always work with people on mindset, which I know that's kind of a term
It's a
out there all
catch-all
over the
term
place
now.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But really looking at what those core beliefs are about themselves and about the greater world in response to them. So seeing what can be shifted there. And a lot of that does tend to be boundaries as well. That piece of interacting with the greater world is, oh yeah, it's okay to it, not only okay, it's necessary, but it definitely is okay to be setting these boundaries. So really practicing that. But I sometimes that doesn't work effectively until they get to the place of being honoring themselves
Yeah.
and saying that, oh yeah, it's okay for me to set a boundary because I'm important, I'm valuable, and what I offer is valid. So getting them to that place first, so that they, and they, in terms of moms, being able to identify how they're already a good parent, and then how they can increase that using if they are highly sensing, using those skills to maximize their abilities as a parent, but also, honoring what they already do, and then how they can expand on that without, once they're outside of that guilt and self-deprecating place, like, oh, I'm just not the mom I want to be. Oh, okay, well, let's identify what that would be. And then where are you already, great. And then what's lacking, and then what can be addressed to create a shift there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, can you share something simple that would help a stressed out, highly sensing mom today? Like, what could they do like right now that could make at least a little shift?
Yeah. So one of the things I have been focusing on this weekend with my show is overwhelm, because like, we're into the holidays and things are starting to get crazy. So focusing on all these different ways to literally just say, what can we do to minimize that overwhelm in the moment? I mean, there's lots of things going forward, all the stuff that I already talked about. So one of the things is like super simple. Sometimes people say, I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time, for all these different things, or there's so much going on. But if we just can stop and be in a place of calm and quiet, and sometimes that's really challenging for people. So one of the things that can actually work is to just say, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes. Can I commit 5 minutes to myself? Okay. So, sit in a place that hopefully you're not distracted, but even if you can't escape anywhere, you're at work or whatever, you're sitting at your desk, you can do this. Take some deep breaths, just kind of center yourself in, and then actually pay attention to every sound that is around you, one at a time. So say, okay, this might normally bother me anyway, or I don't even notice this because there's so much other stuff going on, but I'm going to pay attention to the clock. And so I'm just sitting here. If you can close your eyes, great. If you think that someone's going to be looking at you or whatever, just kind of, zone off a little bit and just say, I'm going to pay attention to the clock. And then say, okay, so I hear it clicking, ticking. What resonance does that have? Is it high pitch, low pitch? Is there any reverberation? Just really paying attention to what that sound is like. And then once you've done that, take a breath and say, oh, now I'm going to pick another sound. And, from my office, I can hear cars going by outside. I'm just going to focus on that right now. What am I hearing? Can I hear the difference in each vehicle that goes by? Am I hearing the tires on the road, or is it gravel, or what is it about? Oh, I can tell when a truck comes versus a car. That's interesting. So just focusing on that particular sound. And then, something maybe again in your internal environment, what's another sound? Oh, like in my house, I could hear little pings and different sounds from my wood stove, or things settling or something. So I can just focus on something like that and say, what is that sound like? How frequent is it? Does the pitch change? And just really focus on that. And so you can do that just for however long you have to do.
Yeah.
And just so you are being mindful, you're in that moment. So you're letting everything else go, even though you're paying attention to things that are happening. And again, it might be those things that are driving you crazy normally.
Right.
I can't, there's all these things, but when you refocus on just one at a time and just really give your focus to it,
Yeah.
instead of saying, this is an annoying thing I'm trying to let go of, say, oh, well, what is that all about? And then you shift to another one. And when you're done, you'll realize, oh, as soon as I shifted over to this one, I could not hear the clock anymore. I mean, if I was trying, I could, but as soon as I shifted over here, I wasn't aware of all these other things anymore. It was just this one that I'm focused on. So that's good for just calming down in the moment, but it's also a good practice for recognizing how we can actually practice being able to let go of things by shifting our focus. So it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I got 10 things in this room that are driving me nuts, but I can pay attention to one at a time, and the rest actually do go away for a little bit. So just honing that ability is pretty powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like skiing and leaning into it instead of going like this, trying
Right.
to make it all stop. You're leaning into one, and you can actually get a little control, in a sense of you're not going,
Yeah.
you're
And
not
then you
out of
can
control.
direct it,
And you
right?
can
Then you're able
direct
to
it.
direct and say, oh, I'm going to pay attention to, I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to go over here.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
It's funny, years ago, I remember I was really stressed out, and I was in the bathroom, and it was nighttime, and I closed my eyes and I could hear a truck going by. And I was like, oh, I don't know why, but that is so comforting me. A
Hmm.
truck. I don't know why. And I kept thinking, what's so significant about a truck? And it really was just, I was allowing myself to focus on that noise
Mm-hmm.
and that sound, and just on that sound, and my whole system started calming down. So it's
Right. And the
what
only
you
way
were
you were able
talking
to
about.
do that was not having judgment about it. So you were just
Yes.
focused on it, but not saying, I shouldn't have to listen to this, or that's such an annoying sound, or whatever. It's just paying attention to it without the, expectation or that
Yeah.
judgment. Then it
Yeah.
was just a thing just to be aware of.
It was almost like I'm paying attention to the background that's always there, and it got me out of my head about what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what the problem is, there's always things around you. The
Mm-hmm.
birds are singing, the squirrels are doing things, there's a truck
Mm-hmm.
going by. You know what I mean? I think
Yep.
it got me out of my, you know, monkey mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Every time we have anything that we can do to get out of that monkey mind is
Yes.
beneficial. And that's why, I was working with this new client about, trying to get into that practice of meditation, just to try it out. And like almost, I mean, I don't know if anybody that I've worked with has not said this. It's like, oh yeah, I have a hard time sticking with that. And so we talk about that and like, why is that? Well, I'm not good at it because I can't stop my mind. So we have to like always work on what the expectation is for meditation, and that the beauty of meditation is not being able to not think, because we can't shut our brains off completely. I mean, monks meditate, or other people, hours, right? If they were completely without anywhere, I mean, they wouldn't need to do that anymore. I think,
Right.
but it's a constant becoming
Yep.
aware. Oh, I'm thinking, and then coming back to the moment. And
Yeah.
every single time you do that is what's powerful. So any of those,
Yeah.
any exercises that you do where you say, oh, I'm totally present right now, that's perfect. And that's what calms our nervous system. And that's what
Yeah.
allows us to refocus,
Yeah.
shift our thinking. Yeah.
And also, like some of my best jokes have come when I was meditating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you get an inspirational idea, and I've
Mhm.
learned to have a pen and paper and just write it down, so I'm not having to think it over and
Yes.
over to remember it. But
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, that came then. It's all right.
Yeah, because we let go of other stuff and our creativity, our creative mind, because and highly sensing people tend to be even more creative. And some people say, well, I'm not artistic, so it doesn't have to be artistic, but creative,
It's
coming up
always
with
creative.
ideas.
Yeah.
And that happens much more easily when we're not fighting all of these things and trying to do and finish and all of that. When we can sit back and let go of all of that, then yeah, then it's like, ooh, I mean,
Yeah.
I have that experience myself with meditation quite often. Sometimes it's stuff I can use with clients and I'll be like, okay, this is for me, but that's great. Okay, remember that. But okay, back to me. But I get my most, the biggest hits of my creativity is when I'm hiking by myself.
Yes. Yes.
If I'm out in nature by myself.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, yeah, stuff
Yeah.
just flows
Taking
because
a walk
in that
is part of
moment,
my business plan. Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Tammy, we could go for hours and hours, but I'm realizing that, uh, we
Yeah.
can't. But I don't have anything clever to say about that. But right before we close this up and I stop the recording, how can people connect with you? What's the easiest way? And I'll put your information, but what's
Mhm.
the easy way for them to connect with
Yeah,
you?
the very easiest is just to go to Linktree, which is linktr.ee, / and then my name, Tammy Goen. And everything that I have on there is on there. So if you want to connect, certainly about my website or socials or ebooks or I mean any of that kind of stuff is all on there. It's the easiest.
Awesome. Tammy, thank you so much for talking to me today, and to all these, professional, stressed out, overwhelmed moms, so that they can learn from you. And please connect with Tammy, because I've done EFT with you. I've listened to you talk, I've seen demonstrations, and it's really helped a lot. So I encourage women to connect with you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me. It's just
Of
always
course.
always great to talk with you.
All right, see
Thanks.
you. Bye.
Bye.